Hello, my name is Melissa Bader-Huskin, and I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a Violence Prevention Coordinator at the UCI CARE office. My email is on the screen and is mbaderhu@uci.edu. If at any point throughout this video you have questions, feel free to send me an email and I answer it to the best of my abilities. And so in this video, I'm going to talk to you about creating a culture of care in your organization. Throughout the winter quarter, I will be hosting a 3-part series around how you can create a culture of care in your organizations. And throughout this video, you will learn some foundational knowledge to set you up for any and all of the upcoming workshops. So to start us off, I do want to do a quick disclaimer that some of the content of this module is regarding sensitive issues relating to the broader topic of sexual violence. So please take care of yourself as needed. And if you need to take a break or alter your participation in any way, please do so. So the agenda for this video is I'm going to be covering our care services, some definitions of power-based personal violence, an overview of bystander intervention, what trauma-informed practices are, and information on future workshops. So getting right into it, let's talk about what the CARE office can do for you. So we have 2 parts to our mission statement at the CARE office. And the first is that we provide free and confidential support services to members of the UCI community who've been impacted by sexual assault, relationship abuse, family violence, and/or stalking. Our programs and services are available to people of all identities and regardless of status. And in addition to the support services side, to help those who have been impacted by these forms of violence, we also aim to end these forms of power-based personal violence by engaging the campus community in education, programming, and transformative action. And so with these 2 different sides to our mission statement, it's really important to remember that we have support services for those that are impacted, as well as ways to get involved and be a leader to help educate others within the community. And so now I want to talk a little bit about what our care advocacy services are. So our care advocates, we have 3 of them in the care office, will provide a variety of things for their clients. And so that can look like emotional support, medical accompaniments, helping with academic accommodations, giving information on a variety of reporting options that are available, as well as doing accompaniments for those. If there is a financial or housing need, they can help with connecting them to services and resources for those, as well as a lot of what they do is referrals to both offices on and off campus. And this is to meet the needs of each client, whatever may arise within their conversations. Next on our support services side, we have our CARE holistic healing programs. So we have a variety of different programs recognizing that healing happens in a variety of ways for folks. And so we want to provide as many modalities as possible to healing to our clients. And so for all of our holistic healing programs, they are usually focused on survivors. And so our Yoga as Healing program is a trauma-informed yoga class that's a quarter long for survivors to take that has a healing focus. We also have our Reassert personal safety courses that we work with Get Safe USA to put on, usually on a quarterly basis as well. On our website, we have downloadable resources available for folks to look at in their own time. And then we also have a healing library where we have a list on our website if you would like to check out what is in the library. And then when we are in person and our office is open, you can come and check out those materials as well. And so our advocacy and holistic healing programs are part of our support services. For our transformative action and prevention education piece, we do a lot of care programming. And so this looks like campus-wide programming, such as our Green Dot Bystander intervention program, or in April, we do Denim Day and Clothesline Project and Take Back the Night for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. We also have Stalking Awareness Month in January that we do a campaign for, and we have a lot of different programs that are open to the campus community to raise awareness and to learn about different ways that we can prevent these forms of violence. We also do workshops and trainings on a variety of topics that you can request through our website at care.uci.edu. And these can be a variety of lengths and can meet the needs of the group that you're requesting the workshop for, very similarly to this video and the series that I'll be putting on in the winter quarter. We also have our peer education programs. So we have Right to Know and Challenging All Men to Prevent Sexism, which do wider education for the campus community through workshops on various topics. And then we have our Violence Intervention and Prevention peer education group, which works within their own fraternities and sororities to do education for their specific chapters. Now that I've talked about what the CARE office can do for you, I want to ground us in some definitions to have us starting from the same place on what power-based personal violence is and why it happens. So first, power-based personal violence is a form of violence where the primary motivator is an assertion of power and or control in order to harm another individual. This can include sexual assault, stalking, relationship violence, or other forms of threat, force, or harassment. Remember, the key piece here is it's the assertion of power and or control to cause harm. And so diving into some more of these definitions, sexual assault is an umbrella term that includes physical acts of a sexual nature that take place without an individual's consent. And this can include touching, rape, or penetration by an object. And the key to this is it's done without a person's consent. And I'm going to define what consent is a little bit more later on. We also have stalking, which is a pattern of coercive behavior that's targeted at a specific individual that would cause a reasonable person to feel fear. And fear is really central to this definition as it relates to the context of the relationship. And so two important things to remember with stalking is that we sometimes might not express fear as being afraid, but rather uncomfortable or unsure of a situation. It could also look like simply changing our behavior as a result and not naming it as being fearful. Additionally, stalking can be very contextual. Sometimes acts of stalking are blatantly criminal, such as property damage, where others can be seen as a normal part of a relationship, such as gift giving. And with this, we want to look at the relationships between the person exhibiting the behavior and the person being targeted by the behavior to understand how it might be appropriate or inappropriate behavior. We also have relationship violence, which is a pattern of coercive behaviors that one partner uses to maintain power and control over another. This can include physical, emotional, verbal, sexual, or financial abuse, and affects the victim's independence, safety, and well-being. We will discuss what power is later on, but as I've mentioned, it's really about maintaining that power and control with power-based personal violence, specifically within relationship violence as well. And they will utilize these various methods to do that. And then lastly, we have other forms of threat, force, or harassment. And so these could include unwelcome sexual advances that can be shown verbally, physically, or written, and can be sometimes named as sexual harassment or coercion through blackmail. And additionally, it might be someone making decisions based on a person's willingness or refusal of sexual behaviors or repeated unwanted contact. And so now that we've gone over definitions of what power-based personal violence is, I'd like for us to get grounded in a couple statistics and a few pieces of information. So as you know, our campus community is being affected every day by sexual assault, intimate partner violence, stalking, harassment, and other forms of violence. Statistically, around 48% of students will experience sexual harassment while at their institution, and 11% will experience sexual harassment through force, violence, or incapacitation. These are overwhelming and unacceptable numbers. College campuses are unique spaces within our greater society, and the dynamics and prevalence of violence are different from those of the general population. This is caused by many factors. For example, proximity and access. On a college campus, individuals have unique access to one another in terms of physical space and information. It's easy to find someone's email or phone number in the directory. It's easy to find out what classes someone has or in what housing community they live in. And this can sometimes be even easier if they share an organization together on campus. And so to add on to this point, colleges also come with built-in systems of power and hierarchies that have the potential to further perpetuate these forms of violence that are rooted in power. So if we even think as simply as within our own academic departments, it's easy to identify the power that a faculty member holds over a graduate student, or the power that a graduate student holds over an undergraduate student. And while we don't necessarily need to get rid of these structures, whether it's on the larger campus broadly or within our individual organizations, they do serve certain purposes, of course. But rather than getting rid of them, we need to make sure that as a community, we are actively working to consider the ways in which power in our actions and our biases have the potential to cause harm in what ways we can combat this. And so, for example, as a supervisor, I can ensure that I'm not exerting harmful power or biases over those I supervise, whether it's intentional or not. And if I do end up doing this, how are we setting up the systems and the community around me to ensure that they are accountable? It's important to note as well that acts of violence do not solely affect the individuals directly involved, but the entire community. And so these incidents send ripples throughout the spaces we occupy, and our responses to them set and reinforce social norms that can perpetuate or prevent further violence and harm. Your roles, not just as leaders within your organization, but as members of our community, are vital to preventing and responding to violence in ways that acknowledge the nuances of power, trauma, and harm. So now I'd like to transition into discussing a little bit about the ways that power may show up in our communities. And so now that we've just grounded ourselves in definitions and a few statistics, I want to talk about consent and power. It's important when we're discussing power-based personal violence that we define what we mean by consent and power. And so consent is the affirmative and enthusiastic yes to each activity and can be revoked at any time. A yes to one activity does not mean a yes to another, nor is it a yes to that activity at another time. This also means that if someone is coerced or influenced to say yes out of fear or desire to stop the person from asking, it is not consent. And this is because power has now influenced this. And power shows up in a variety of ways in our lives, and it has the ability to influence the actions and choices of others. We see formal ways of power through positions and organizations or relationships that are built purposefully. So leadership or mentorship roles, such as maybe having a big within an organization. We also can see these creating informally through relationships with one another or the amount of experience that someone has. So if it's the first year someone's in an organization, they might view someone who's been in the organization for 3 or 4 years as having more power than them, and that might influence their decisions. And again, power in and of itself is not a bad thing. We learn a lot from our mentors and from folks that have more experience than us. And we have positions of power within organizations for a purpose to help things run. But it's rather how the folks that are given that power utilize it. And an imbalance of power may cause someone to feel as though they need to do something for fear of negative consequences. And it's important to be aware of how we might be creating an imbalance of power in our interactions, as well as making sure people know that there's accountability for if they misuse their power, there are consequences to that, and letting them know that it's not okay and sending those messages. And so now we've kind of had this understanding of what forms of violence are, and we've talked about how you are in a unique position to help stop these types of violence from happening by letting people know that they should not misuse their power, they should not commit these forms of violence. You get to create a culture of care within your organization that normalizes actions that prevent these forms of violence. And that's done through what's called green dots. And so this is coming from our green dot bystander intervention program. And so I want to talk a little bit about what a green dot is and why they're important. So first, I want you to imagine a map covered with red dots, such as on the screen. And each red dot on it represents an act of interpersonal violence. It can be a rape, a hit, a threat, intimidating words, controlling behaviors, unwanted touch. And now I want you to imagine adding a green dot in the middle of all of those red dots on the map. A green dot is a behavior, choice, or action that promotes safety and communicates utter intolerance for violence. It's pulling a friend out of a high-risk situation, volunteering a few hours, posting a bystander video on social media, checking in on a friend you were worried about, ensuring that there's accountability system if people misuse their power or commit one of these acts. And the more green dots we do, soon they begin to be outnumbering the red dots, and they take over the map, creating a community where less members are hurt. And they can be both reactive, so when harm is being seen, stopping that harm from continuing, or they can be proactive, where you're preventing red dots from happening before it's even a thought in someone's mind. And I'm going to talk a lot about where you can learn what these are and how you can promote them in your organization in one of our workshops. And a really big piece of some proactive actions is being aware of what trauma is and incorporating trauma-informed practices into your work as a leader in your organization. And so I want to give a quick overview of what trauma is and what trauma-informed practices are. So first, to allow us to move forward with the same definition, I would like to pull from this working definition from psychiatrist and researcher Judith Herman. And so this definition is that it is an individual's subjective experience that determines whether an event is or is not traumatic. An event or situation creates psychological trauma when it overwhelms the individual's perceived ability to cope. The individual feels emotionally, cognitively, and physically overwhelmed. The circumstances of the event commonly include abuse of power, betrayal of trust, entrapment, helplessness, pain, confusion, and/or loss. And this definition helps us conceptualize what constitutes trauma and why people with similar experiences react and cope with them in different ways. Someone's ability to cope with certain situations is based in their previous lived experiences and their own resilience. And so, keeping in mind our working definition of trauma, let's consider now how common trauma actually is. So, over 50% of the US population will experience at least one traumatic event within their lifetime, and about 7% of the population will develop PTSD at some point in their lives as a result of a traumatic event. Trauma is also unfortunately common during childhood for many Americans. The ACE study, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, explored how many respondents had experienced an adverse childhood experience, such as losing a parent, having a family member go to prison, or experiencing abuse. In this particular study, 67% of respondents had experienced at least one adverse childhood experience, and over 20% of those reported experiencing 3 or more. Trauma can take a lot of different forms. So it can be things like witnessing severe injury or death, institutional oppression, natural or man-made disasters, abuse, physical or sexual assault. And all of these can cause trauma responses in those who experience them. So while trauma is not unique to only power-based personal violence can cause a traumatic response in someone. And so now that we know what trauma is and we've talked about it and how these experiences how prevalent it is in affecting an individual, I want to give a quick definition of trauma-informed practices. And so the meaning of the term trauma-informed care is fairly straightforward. Trauma-informed refers to the ways in which someone's work, whether that is as an intern, a supervisor, a club executive board, or other role, is influenced by their understanding of trauma. And then trauma-informed care, trauma-informed practices, then works to create opportunities to empower a person and rebuild control and choice, since the circumstances of a traumatic event commonly include themes of powerlessness, loss, pain, or betrayal. And by integrating trauma-informed practices and values into your work within your organization, you are decreasing the likelihood that someone will be re-traumatized or stigmatized. Some folks think at first that these practices don't need to be or can't be integrated into their work. But if you think about it, we're all going to be coming into contact either directly or indirectly with trauma survivors. And by slightly changing the way we phrase things, the opportunities we provide, or the ways we interact with others, we can support people in feeling valued and in control of our own lives. or in control of their own lives. And it really does create a culture of care within our different organizations. And so additionally, as leaders, it's important to keep in mind how we can support survivors if they do disclose information to us. And this is because we want to keep in mind that sometimes we will find out after the fact that someone is experiencing relationship violence. And with these, we want to ensure we are ready to support them. So in order to support a survivor, we want to make sure the following is done. Making sure the person is safe in the immediate moment if possible, seeing if they should move to a different location or need immediate medical attention. Listen, believe, and support the person. Sometimes we hear of a disclosure of power-based personal violence. Our first reaction is to spit out as many resources or statements as we can think of to alleviate how the person and ourselves are feeling. Instead, it's good to take a deep breath, create a space for the other person, and listen to what their needs are and what they want to disclose. We also want to allow the person to express their feelings in any way, as we know that responses to potentially traumatic experiences differ from person to person. This means ensuring that we are validating their reactions to the experience by using respectful language. If they are not utilizing the word rape, but instead saying they were taken advantage of, reflect that language back to them rather than defining the experience for them. It's not expected that you act as a professional counselor when someone discloses to you, but rather that you are a supportive confidant and connect the person to the resources they might need. This can look like providing information such as the care office, the counseling center, 24/7 hotlines, or reporting options, and letting the person navigate what resources they want access to and when. It's important to provide options and empower the person to make their own decisions rather than defining what they should do next. This is because in instances of trauma or power-based personal violence, we know that power is being taken away from the individual. We want to be able to provide as much power back to them as we possibly can. So as I'm getting to the end of my video, I want to cover what our upcoming workshops that I keep referring to are. So part one is going to be focusing on power dynamics that exist in organizations and how to mitigate these dynamics and promote a space of accountability to ensure power is not being misused. Our second workshop, you will learn more about the effects of trauma and how to utilize this information to incorporate trauma-informed practices into your organization and support survivors without them needing to disclose any information. And then our third and last workshop, you will learn more about green dots, what a bystander is, and how you can intervene both reactively and proactively, in addition to how you can set up an environment for your organization to help others intervene themselves. All of these you can attend 1, 2, or 3, and we'll be covering topics and going more in depth and things that I've talked about in this video. And then lastly, I just want to leave you with some resources that are available locally and nationally, in case you need them. So here are some confidential resources. UCI CARE and the Counseling Center are on-campus resources available to folks. And then there's also the National Sexual Assault Hotline and the National Domestic Violence Hotline that are available on a national level and can be utilized through a chat function or calling or using their website. We also have some reporting resources. So the Office of Equal Opportunity and Diversity is our Title IX office on campus, which is a reporting resource for folks. And then we also have UCIPD on campus that can be utilized. And they also have a 24/7 safety escort number if that is of interest for folks. And so thank you so much. Again, if you have any questions, please contact me at my email that's on the screen. And if you have a moment, just take a quick picture of this QR code or go to the bit.ly link that is on the screen, bit.ly/care in all caps and then eval in all lowercase letters, to fill out an evaluation to help us continually improve our programs and workshops to best serve our community. Thank you so much for listening.